This is another episode of Conservative Conversations with your hosts, Reid and Frank. How you today, Frank?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Glad to be back at it. Been off for a couple weeks. Been a little busy. You can hear about what we've been up to in our other podcast, the Wicky, Wacky radio show. But for now, we're just going to jump right into a few news bits that we've been looking over recently. And I'm going to start with a Supreme Court case that I heard about recently. I first heard it in a little, like, 2 to 5 minute long audio news brief podcast that Fox does. And they mentioned this case. It's called Carson v. Makin. And the oral arguments were just heard, let's see, today is the 9th of December. It was, the arguments were done on the 8th. And a little bit of background on the case is that in the state of Maine, they have a thing called a tuitioning program. And in the state, there are, the school districts are highly localized. And in particular parts of Maine, it's really rural. And there are some towns where there's no public high school option available in the district just because there's either not enough students or not enough people, to fund it with taxes and stuff like that.
Right.
So the state provides funding to families in those situations to go to a school of their choosing. And the main issue in the case is that the state does not allow students to use the money to go to religious schools, or as they're called in Maine, sectarian schools. And there's a group of families that try to send their students to these sectarian schools, but were denied based on them being sectarian. So the families wanted to challenge that based on another recent case that happened, I believe, last year. It was Espinoza v. the Montana Department of Revenue, I believe. And it had to do with saying that, hopefully I get this right, that the state couldn't prohibit private scholarships from being used at religious schools that are tax deductible. I hope I got that right. And so I believe they're called the partitioning party in Carson v. Makin wanted to challenge that, trying to apply the same rule in Maine. In the case, Carson argues, or the petitioning party argues, that religious discrimination is religious discrimination no matter how you want to look at it, and that the state shouldn't be preventing the students or the families from using the money to go to the religious school of their choice. And what Makin, or I forget what term it is, the other party, says is basically arguing the Establishment Clause and saying that the state doesn't want to fund any particular religious education.
Well, to use the language that we heard over and over is to inculcate religion.
Yeah. Right. And like I said, I read through some of the transcript before the audio was available, and at first it seemed like the petitioning party was making a decent case until Justice Sotomayor asked a question or brought up a point that sort of made me kind of reconsider my thoughts on it. And one of the things that she tried to point out was that the way this program works is that if you live in a district where there's a public school, your kids go to the public school unless you choose to pay for them to go elsewhere, like in most places. And then if your district does not have a high school, the district can contract with another district to send the students there. And then if that is still not an option, that's when the state steps in and provides money to the family for the student to go to a school of their choosing. And this can be just about any school, because I've heard examples of students going to like foreign boarding schools, like boarding schools in like France and Switzerland, stuff like that. But the money cannot be used to attend a sectarian school. And Carson doesn't, or the petitioning party doesn't think that's fair, and it's discrimination against religion. And what Sotomayor brought up that made me sort of reconsider it is that, and if a student lives in a public school, in a district where there is a school, they don't get any money to go to private school, other than, maybe their parents do scholarships or pay for it themselves. The state isn't providing any money for that. So it kind of doesn't seem fair that the state is giving this money to the students because, unfortunately, they don't have a school for them, but they can't use it. Let me back up a second. That they could use it anywhere, including a religious school, doesn't quite seem fair. Which I can agree with if like in the case where there is a public school, if a parent wants to send their child to a private school or a religious school, they'd be paying for it out of pocket. So I think it makes sense that you might set some restrictions on where the students can go, because why does the state get to pay for a student to go to a really, really nice school just because there isn't a high school in their area, but all these other students would still have to pay out of pocket to go there?
Well, if you're ready for me to chime in,
sure,
I definitely
I
do have a few thoughts on this. I mean, I definitely think it's a very interesting case.
Mm-hmm.
My first take when you were talking to me about it last evening was open and shut case. They ought to be able to do what they want,
right.
But there definitely are some nuances here. And like you and I were talking about, one of the things that I wanted to really think about at first was the figure, the particular stipend, if you will. I'd like to look at it as a stipend that they're giving to these kids. And I kind of just figured, I threw a number at you. I figured it'd be about, $700 to $1,000 a month.
Right.
And I think, come to find out, that is about what it is. It's about $1,000 a month that we're talking about per child, or a lump sum figure of about $9,000.
Right. I believe that is what I heard in a couple of videos I saw, that were reviewing this case.
And that's per child.
Yeah, I think
so. Well, as I understand it, it's
right.
per child. So, I mean, just sort of my thinking, generally speaking, is that things are pretty expensive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about that later in this segment, but if you're talking about $1,000 cost, or $1,000 stipend for somebody who lives in very rural Maine, I just figure that $1,000 is going to be eaten up pretty quickly over the course of a month.
Right.
With travel costs to this other school, unless there's boarding, you still have to have meals. Some schools will charge you for the meal program. You still have to buy textbook, pencils, pens, whatever. Some schools may provide the textbooks, but there's usually a cost to an education, even at the high school level. So I figure $1,000 a month in today's day and age wouldn't go very far, to be honest with you.
Right.
So I almost want to ask the question: is the state being petty here, and saying, no, we're going to deny it because it's a religious school?
Right.
But The thing that really sticks for me and why I think Carson here probably isn't going to make this, as I read it, I don't think he's going to win this case because of the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature had the option. I mean, I think at one point before 1980, they even did. They had the option to fund these religious schools. You could use the funds. Yeah,
that is one thing that Carson brings up and to argue is that for 100 years, up until 1980s, the program did allow students to go to sectarian schools, but it was I believe, the state attorney general at the time, and as Carson put it, not quoting exactly, but dubiously or erroneously read in something about the establishment clause of of religions and the separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's something, as I understand, the legislature, based on all this, right? Maybe you haven't finished what you're saying, but as I understand, they reviewed it and changed the law to say specifically that they weren't going to allow these funds to be used at sectarian schools.
Right.
So to me, it's just cut and dry like that. If it went up through the legislature, I don't see how it's going to be overturned by the Supreme Court in this manner.
Right.
Especially when, I mean, it's a little dubious to use that word. It is a little dubious here because we're not talking about harm in the traditional sense, sure. I don't think. So I think it sort of is a tough thing to prove. I don't see the Supreme Court overturning this, whatever, since 1980, however, 41 years of precedent here in the state of Maine, when the solution's right there. You have the legislature change it again.
Yep, I kind of agree that's probably how it's going to end up. The Supreme Court policy basically either do nothing or rule narrowly somehow, saying that Maine's got to go make a couple adjustments, either allow it or change their phrasing to not allow other school options or something like that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that they were kind of, once the people arguing for Makin made their arguments, because they were kind of going back and forth with the justices about the religion aspect of it, of what the state might consider a religion and stuff like that, because they used examples of where the school might be religious, but so long as they're not, as we said, inculcating religion in their curriculum into the students, then they can be part of the program. They can be a religious school, they just can't do a religious thing.
And just to put inculcate differently, it's like to require or force by mandatory, what would you call it?
Right.
Mandatory outline or whatever, that these kids have to go to temple, have to, whatever, do their rosary, have to say their prayers. That's what the state has said they will not pay for. They won't pay for kids to be forced to have to do religious schooling or whatever.
And that, since you're phrasing it that way, about the state paying for it, that reminds me that Carson has argued that since the money is provided to the family and then it's their choice where the money goes, it is not the same as the state funding it. Because I think somebody, either one of the justices or the council, gave the example of somebody receiving Social Security and tithing to their church with that. Because that wouldn't be the same as the federal government, endorsing or funding a particular religion.
Yes.
I think it's an interesting case. It's definitely got a few nuanced parts to it.
Well, and I would recommend that you all go check it out. Right. I mean, there's a particularly interesting exchange. We got it from the transcript. We were going over the transcripts last night, so if you were to find the PDF version, which we should be able to make available, but my favorite parts, I listened a little later as I was falling asleep. I've heard some other great parts, but my favorite part happens in an exchange from page 73, about line 15, through page 79 of the transcript, about line 12. And they're talking there about, what sorts of extreme schools might pop up, and they're doing sort of hypothetical scenarios of would this school qualify based on these values, or would this school qualify based on these values, or whatever. And the fellow representing
Makin?
The state, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fellow representing the state was arguing that no, of course not. There would never be a school that would teach Marxism or Leninism or white supremacy or anything like that. And his proof, his evidence of that is that the legislature, even if it should happen, some white supremacist school tried to apply to be a member of Maine's tuition program, he said that the legislature would find a way to make sure that this school did not qualify.
Right, and he also said that, the legislature can't possibly, legislate for every type of scenario that might come up like that.
But then, I think he goes out on a little bit of a limb, and he says, no school would ever teach Leninism or Marxism. And then, Justice Alito, one of my favorites, he pipes up quite quickly and says, well, what about a school that teaches critical race theory? That Marxism dogma that, has been in the news all over the place. And again, the state falls back on what I think the whole answer to this case is going to be. His response is that the legislature would have to review what that curriculum is. What's it called again? Even though I just said the critical race theory. It lies with the legislature. So if critical race theory turns out to be not good for the public schools, then the legislature will correct it.
Right. And I thought it was kind of funny that the council said that he doesn't even know what it would mean or what it means to teach critical race theory.
Yeah, but I think that kind of makes sense because he's a lawyer,
right,
and he's saying, I don't know what the components of this curriculum are. I haven't read the books, I haven't taken the classes, I don't know what it would be like to teach this to a child.
Right, he would.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, right. It's fair for him to say, but
But I think we all know.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. We know that it's happening, and it's specific dogma, and they even talked about
when we know it's Marxist.
Right. Yes, but they even talked about, they questioned if there is a school that taught or inculcated anti-religion, that no religion whatsoever is good. The council said that they would likely not be permitted to be part of the program.
So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting that Maine's legislature in 1980 put in that schools must be religiously neutral.
Right.
It's a concept.
Yep. But like we said, people, we encourage you to look at this case for yourselves because we think it's interesting, even if it might not have wide-reaching implications for people. It's it's interesting to look at, especially if you're someone concerned about religious liberties and stuff like that. And again, it's called Carson v. Makin, Carson and Makin. And I'll have links to the transcript and hopefully some good audio. The audio, if you want that too.
Okay, well then, you want to move on over to what I woke up to this morning?
Sure.
Well, the first thing as I came awake that my eyes lit upon, my cell phone had a notification. It sends me these, I call them dumb. I think they're dumb little news notifications. I never asked for them. I don't even know how they pop up onto my phone. But I wake up to one that says, something to the effect, I was a little groggy, but it says something to the effect that fourth doses of the vaccine are now being called for, or a second round of booster shots. So I wasn't too happy about that right away, and my friend sent me a meme, and it says, it's got a funny picture on there if you're not familiar with memes. It's got a funny picture, it doesn't really matter too much, and it has a caption that asks the question, do you know what the vaccinated and unvaccinated have in common? They'll never be fully vaccinated. And if you're fans of this channel and have been listening for a while, we've called this. I think that's something I've said myself. I don't know which episode it might have been. Maybe trans-COVID statehood. That pops to mind, but I didn't review. But anyway, so I did a little digging into this. I want to see what all the hubbub is about. The name of the new dance? The Omicron.
The
right?
Omicron. I heard some the other day say it's so funny I couldn't imagine. I wish I remember how they said it.
Well, the new song and dance is Omicron. So I go looking into this a little bit, okay? And I find this CNBC article, and they're discussing research coming from Professor Alex Segal with the African Health Research Institute. And it was a 12-person test who had taken the Pfizer vaccine, prior to signing up for this trial. And the people in this trial saw a 41-fold, quoting from this article here, a 41-fold drop in antibody ability to neutralize Omicron. So there are some interesting things here right away. So I don't know what a 41-fold drop is, if that's 41%, if it's 41 times. I don't know what it is. That's the only number that's listed here. It's a 41-fold drop. Whatever that means to you. If it means something to you, good for you. So I look into it a little bit more, and I find out that this study, they had 14 plasma samples from these 12 vaccinated people, 6 who had already had COVID and beaten it, and 6 who had not. So let me ask you, Reid, does that make any sense? I've already told you twice now, it's a 12-person test.
Yeah.
Where does this 14 plasma samples come from? How do you get 14 plasma samples out of 12 people?
Somebody got some twice.
Somebody got some twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I bet you they were the ones with the highest antibodies.
Right. Well, this just popped in my head. If there were 14 samples from 12 people, that's 2 extra from the number of people.
Mm-hmm.
That means they could have picked and choose easily which 12 of the samples they wanted to make to show their point.
Exactly. I mean, right there you can see bias in this. Not only is it a Pfizer study. Well, no, I'm sorry, it's not. It's this African Health Research Institute. But I don't know who funded it. It could be Pfizer.
George Soros.
But, that's speculation. But anyway, they end up saying, they released these lab results to show that if you've only had 2 doses of the vaccine, you still have some protection. But the booster offers more. Apparently a 41-fold increase if you take this study, right? But one of the interesting things, since they were studying people who beat COVID, who had the infection and beat it, and people who had never had COVID at all, they found that previous infection followed by vaccination is what really increases your ability to confer protection from Omicron.
Right.
So how do you like that, Reid? They end up, from this study of 6 who've beaten it, 6 who haven't, they end up saying that if you have beaten it, you have a better chance of beating the new strains.
Right.
I bet you, now they add in here, they say, previous infection followed by vaccination. But I dare say, I want to go out on a limb here and say, it's probably not the vaccination at all. It's probably your prior infection, having had it and beaten it of your own. You have your own natural reaction without the vaccine at all whatsoever. That's probably the real ticket, not the vaccines at all.
Well, that would make sense because this whole time we've known, well, maybe not whole time, for a while at least now, we've known that natural immunity is more durable than the vaccines.
Yep.
And if the Omicron variant is, I don't know what percentage is less deadly or less lethal than the original strain and the Delta strain, but it's less lethal, more contagious but less lethal, it would obviously make sense that it's probably natural immunity and having had the virus that's still the most effective thing against the new virus strain.
Yep. Well, I found that one interesting, okay, especially because these results, these numbers that they have in here are just so wacky. 14 samples out of 12 people.
Right.
How do you do that? Oh, man. Okay, so then, though, this article didn't say anything about a fourth shot. This was comparing whether you've had 2 shots versus 3 shots and whether you've beaten the COVID, or you've never even had the COVID in your system. So then I go digging a little bit further because I want to hear what woke me up this morning. I want to hear about this fourth shot and why we're pushing for this fourth shot. So I find an article out of U.S. News, and we'll have all the links up available for you. So go read these for yourself if you'd like. I would never try to make any of this up. I'm not that clever. But this one, U.S. News article here is talking about how the Pfizer CEO, didn't catch his name here, but the CEO of Pfizer has previously been on, I guess it's a TV show or something called Squawk Box. I guess he is a sort of a recurring character on there, being interviewed frequently on there. And in a prior episode of that Squawk Box show, he had claimed that a fourth shot of their Pfizer thing would probably not be necessary until a whole year after having the booster shot or the third dose. But he's been back on Squawk Box now because of Omicron, and he now has changed his tune. And he's advocating a fourth shot sort of now, a fourth shot or a second booster, because they have some internal data. I wonder if it's not like this data we just reviewed, this whacked out data, where you get, 2 gallons of lemonade out of 1 lemon. I don't know how you do that kind of math, but okay. But they have some data that shows, and I love this too. Tell me this isn't the same study or a very similar study. He's quoting some internal Pfizer data that shows a booster shot, so just another round of the shot, increases antibodies 25-fold in lab-tested blood samples. So if you just go get a booster, you're increasing your antibodies 25, times 25? I don't know what I don't get this 25-fold. 25%? I bet it's only 25%.
Yeah.
But then, the weirdest thing that I read out of this article, and I loved this one, is there's a little quote that says here, the company is also working on a vaccine that specifically targets Omicron and would be ready for delivery within 100 days of regulatory approval. So get this, Reid, they're going off of the boosters. They don't even want to just keep pumping more and more boosters into you, even though they're also advocating that.
Right.
Now they're also going to come out with flavored COVID shots. How do you like that? Would you like the Delta flavor, the Omicron?
Well, since you mentioned it, I've heard from a couple of different places that they have a Delta variant vaccine at the ready. But for whatever reason, it hasn't been pushed out. So now they're telling us in 100 days we have the Omicron vaccine ready, booster ready.
They've got it all lined up.
And no, when you and I were talking about this off air earlier, you made the point that it's probably just the same thing. They just renamed it.
Yeah, they probably just said, oh, well, the Omicron's already out. Nobody's talking about Delta anymore. Let's just, let's get a little whiteout and fudge these files here.
Right.
Just change the name.
Right, and then in another 100 days, they're going to say, here's your pie.
Yeah.
For Pie Day.
Pie for Pie Day.
Your pie vaccine.
One day only. Go to a Walgreens near you. Get your pie shot.
And then another 100 days after that, here's the Roe variant. Get your Roe shot.
And what? Oh, yeah, we really did got on a roll with that. Because I keep wondering what alphabet they're going to use after the Greek alphabet.
Yep.
And I watched some woman on the news, she even joked that they're going to start using hurricane names.
Right.
So, definitely some interesting developments there. But it's super ironic for me, like I already said, just to reiterate. But, we've had a lot of these feelings for a while, especially if you're fans. If you want to go back and review the material, we've pretty much been skeptical of all this from the beginning. We said there's no way you could ever be fully vaxxed. They kept changing the requirements. I mean, even from the beginning.
Right. Well, because they even changed what the vaccine was supposed to do.
Yeah, all the symptoms and
how
deadly, how it could spread.
Right. It was originally supposed to be like, I don't want to use this word, but I will, like a cure. Not an actual cure, but basically it's, you're basically not going to get the damn shit.
Yeah.
But then they eventually changed it to, no, it's not an actual vaccine that prevents you from getting it. It just offers protection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 25-fold protection over your own immunity.
Right.
Whatever 25-fold means.
and you wonder why people question the vaccines. And I'm not... what they would say, anti-vax. If somebody wants to go get it, go get it. If you think it's good for you, go get it. But I'm not interested. I don't believe any particular conspiracies about it. I'm not interested because I don't get the regular flu vaccine. Never have. Never felt like I needed to. And I apply the same logic here.
Well, and whether or not there's some grand conspiracy or not, I mean, that gets a little esoteric. But it's pretty easy to just read the writing on the wall and say that, 14 plasma samples out of 12 people, this stuff isn't making any sense, I mean...
and speaking of the flu vaccine, when was the last time you had to go get 4 flu shots in 1 year?
Yeah. I mean, this stuff just doesn't add up. You can use your own common sense. You don't have to be a doctor, I've taken a math class. I'm not a fool.
Right.
14 samples out of 12 people, folks. How do you do that? Somebody was tested twice. Why?
Yep. And why wouldn't they have included those 2 extra numbers? Why not?
Why not just put it in your data and say why? We got 14 samples because blah, blah, blah.
Right. I mean, it's, their constant, push for, new vaccine, boosters. People just don't want to keep doing that, especially, because earlier today, I told you I got a news flash on my phone about now how they're clearing 16 and 17-year-olds to get their third Pfizer shots.
Yep.
And, they need it. Oh, they really need to get
like
get
anybody needs it.
Right.
Give me a break.
Especially the kids. I don't think people are going to put up with it for too much longer. I mean, obviously there will be dupes who get duped and are going to go along with it, but we're getting to the point where you're running out of people that you're going to convince.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, for goodness sakes. I mean, who really just wants to say, it's been 13 days since my last shot. I'd better go get another one.
I'm getting the shakes. I need my COVID.
I don't get it. All right. Well, does that bump us up to...
Yep. I think we can move on to what I have picked out for the next topic here. And I can't really say I have too many opinions on it, but I was going through our news across the web page on our website at contemporaryconservative.net just to see what kind of headlines stood out to me that we might be able to talk about. And there was one. And the headline was something like 12 cities break homicide records and like all the mayors are Democrats, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And I said here to Frank, I said, I wonder if our home city that we live in right now is on there, because it's led by a Democrat. And sure enough, when I opened the article, it was I think the 7th city listed on out of the 12. And I did take a few little notes here. Let me get them here. And see, one of the first bits that I picked was 5 of those 12 cities had just set their records last year. Or if they didn't set the record last year was the first time they had broken their previous record. And I can list those cities here in 1 second. It was Indianapolis, Columbus, Ohio, Birmingham, Alabama, Toledo, and Louisville. All 5 of those cities this year broke their record-setting homicides last year. And then another little note, data I got, is that Chicago, the 3rd largest city, leads with roughly 739 homicides at the end of November. And one of the things that they talked about in the article I saw was that several, if you will, authoritative sources, former police chiefs and stuff like that, mentioned that there isn't really one specific cause for the crime increase, because people cite COVID, people cite the economy, and some other people talk about, these no cash bail or these bail reform policies of some of these Democrat cities. But one trend that was pointed out that is clear is that between 2019 and 2020, there was a 24% decrease in arrests made. And that is the lowest number of arrests in, I believe it was 25 years. There was like 7.6 million arrests last year. And prior to that, in 2019, there was a little more than 10 million. And, I would agree that's probably part of the problem. Because if you're not arresting these people and punishing for their crimes, and, just maybe bring them in for the night and then let them go, they're not learning any lesson. They're not getting punished for their crime, so they can just walk right back out and do it again. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this recently. An example would be this, the SUV that plowed into people, if you guys have seen those headlines, where that guy who was just, arrested for a crime and released on either no bail or was like, I think $1,000 bail, and then a couple of days later he runs over those people in the parade. And, I guess this just stands out to me because when I saw that headline, I questioned whether or not our home city was on there, because I believe it was earlier in this year when I was still permitted to hang out with one of my more liberal friends. We were out on a walk, and we were sort of talking about the homicide rate in the city and how it's just been outpacing the year before. And I had mentioned that, I bet you it's going to pass last year because it's already, on the rise. And I had made the comment that this is kind of a passive comment.
What month would this have been?
March, April.
Oh, okay, and it was already outpacing the year before it. At that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. At that time. It might have been a little closer to May. It was late spring. I'll say late spring.
Okay.
And I had made the comment that I almost would be more concerned about randomly getting shot at a bar and then catching COVID at a bar at the time.
How did she take that comment?
I don't really know. I can't remember what her comment was to that. And,
I just wonder if a real Looney Tune liberal would fear gun violence more than the COVID. That really is an interesting question for me. I'd love to hear one of their opinions on that.
And, it's just that this, like I said when I started talking about it, I don't have any particular opinions on the situation. I just thought the headline stood out to me because I had questioned, I had bet that, my own, place of residence was going to be on that list.
Well, I find it very interesting. Did you have more notes or?
I think, let's see, what do I got here?
Because the most interesting thing I have to say is just that we've seen headlines like this before. I mean, there was I think it was a couple of years back now, maybe as many as 4, but there was a big stink for a while about the deficits under liberal mayors and governors.
Right.
The sorts of deficits that are run up under them, and how places like Chicago and San Francisco are just adding to the national debt because they keep getting bailed out by the feds.
Right.
So, and it's it correlates with poor leadership, which usually seems to be Democrats.
Right.
I wonder why that is.
Right. But the only few notes I had left, I had the list of all the 12 cities that it mentioned. And I don't think I wrote this down, but one thing I do remember from the article was that last year in 2020, I can't remember if it was compared to the prior year in 2019. I think it was. I'll just say it was, and I'll have the article so people can go look for themselves and tell me I'm wrong. But it was a 30% increase in homicides from 2019 to 2020. And we're already, a lot of these cities are already outpacing that. And, one of the last numbers I had written down was that so far this year, 2021, there were 19,278 homicides nationally. And I don't know why, but I didn't get the number for the year before.
Well, and that's not just homicides. That's gun violence.
Yeah, that is right, because this came from the ABC.com gun violence tracker.
Right.
So
I'm sure there's been a lot more homicides than 19,000.
Right. And, I just, since this does, sort of hit close to home, I don't want to say I'm in fear of walking around where I live, because I'm not. I still feel relatively safe, because most of this stuff is happening not in the part of town where I live.
Yeah.
But still, this isn't the kind of city I want to be living in, where you have hundreds of homicides a year just in the city. This city barely has 1 million citizens in it. And one last bit. Philadelphia, which has a little more than 1 million citizens, it this year has more homicides than New York City and Los Angeles, not combined but individually, and those are the 2 largest cities. So
isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. It's and it's sad because
what's
people
going on, Philadelphia?
Yeah, people are losing their lives, and particularly just last 2 nights ago, I believe. This is partly what kind of made me think to look at this article when I saw the headline, that there was a drive-by shooting downtown that killed 3 people, a 22-year-old and a 9 and a 6-year-old, something like that. So it's it's sad to see that it doesn't look like much is being done about it. I know our city just recently brought in a new police chief. It's because I think that's going to help. I don't know if it will. But
we can hope.
Yeah.
I wish him luck.
Right. But I'm sitting here trying to come up with a point to put on it before we move on. But I guess I don't really have any.
Well, it's just poor leadership.
Yeah.
And hopefully this change will do it.
Right. I don't know when this mayor of ours is going to be up for election, because I think he's been the mayor as long as I've been living in this city for like 5 years now. So he ought to be coming up soon. Maybe he was just put into office when I came here, so.
Flush that turd down the drain.
Yeah, flush him down the drain.
Alrighty, well, if that takes us over to my final things here, I don't know how easily I'm going to link these together. I'm going to try my best, but I've got some stuff here about, I have it titled as Unfavorable News Coverage Under Biden. Okay,
Yep, I've heard this.
Well, I'm going to make a couple points here about, for the longest time, they kept saying that this inflation that we're seeing all over the place is just transitory. Reid, it's just transitory. It's leaving the station. It's not going to be here very long.
It's coming and going.
Yeah, it's on its way out. Well, I think they're starting to realize that this is here to stay, and it's going to get a lot worse. Okay. I just found out the most interesting thing to me is that the Dollar Tree, the Dollar Tree?
Yep.
Well, it's now the $1.25 tree.
Yep, I've heard that one.
So, if that doesn't really kick everybody in the pants, I mean it.
Right,
the Dollar Tree for years.
They're changing their business model.
The whole business nationally.
Yeah.
Now everything's $1.25. So if that doesn't really kick these people in the pants, especially on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. Now all that stuff, people used to just love the Dollar Tree. You can go in there and get name brand stuff, decent things.
Sure.
For $1. Maybe it's not huge portions, huge quantities, but you can get good things at the Dollar Tree for $1. Now everything across the board has gone up 25 cents. So that means for every 4 items you buy, that's another $1. Right?
It adds up, especially for, like you said, people in the lower socioeconomic scale.
Well, and also you have to look at it this way. Now, something real cheap that maybe wasn't worth $1. See, it kind of all used to work out because maybe they had some items in there that, I don't know, maybe it'd be worth like $2.50 or something. But they sell enough stuff that's probably only like worth 17 cents at $1 that it kind of all washes.
Right.
Well, now I think it adds insult to injury because if you go in there and you're buying one of those products that probably only costs in actuality about 17 cents, you're now paying even more, $1.25 for a friggin' 17-cent item.
Right.
This also means that if you're really on a budget, if you're a pensioner, you're not somebody who has income coming in the front door, you're going to have to be working harder to go around and find deals, find where you can get your money. You know what I mean? Save places where you can save your money.
You'll be pinching your pennies even more.
Yeah. So, that, I had a discussion with a young lady who has children, and she's on the more liberal side. She didn't really seem to understand all this about inflation. And so that's why, I really hope it kicks in for these people.
Yeah.
Because never again, I promise you,
right?
Never again will you see anything in the Dollar Tree for $1. Everything's going to be $1.25, and it's just going to keep going that way. Right. Someday it'll be $1.50, someday it'll be $2, okay? And let me make this point. We just did a bunch of recent traveling. We actually talked about it, as my colleague here said, on our other channel, if you care to go check that out. And as we were traveling, we stayed at a few hotels, didn't we?
Yeah.
And they're certainly not cheap anymore, are they?
No.
It is not cheap. It's hard, I dare say. What would you say the average going cost for a decent hotel is? Maybe $100 a night?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say like 80, 90, 100, somewhere around there.
Somewhere in the ballpark. We'll go with 90. I'm fine with that. Somewhere in the ballpark of $90. Well, here's something interesting that I found out. I didn't know, but in 1962, there was a hotel chain that opened up called the Motel 6. You're familiar?
Yep.
Do you know why they called it the Motel 6?
It was only $6?
Cost $6 a night to stay.
Jeez.
That was 1962.
Wow.
Okay? Now look at 10 years later. A little company opened up called Super 8. You know, the Super 8 motel.
Uh-huh.
Could you guess for me?
$8?
$8.88.
Okay, yeah.
Cost $8.88
All right, that makes sense.
in 1972. So that's 10 years later. The going cost of a hotel room had apparently gone up about less than $3 over 10 years.
What's a third increase? $6 to $8?
Now we're all the way up in the neighborhood of $100 a night. Okay, and it certainly hasn't gone back towards any $6. You see what I'm saying? It's just, once this trend starts, it stays that way.
Right. Inflation rarely ever deflates.
So, I think it's interesting. They're waking up, but you still have some idiots out there. Oh, let me tell you. Let me put it this way. You have some people who are waking up like, here's a quote from our buddy, not really, over at the Fed, the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell.
Yep.
He's now quoted as saying, price increases have spread much more broadly.
Yep.
Meaning prices are up across the board and not only in those sort of supply line issue cases. You know, they kept blaming it on, the COVID came in and the supply lines, and then that ship got stuck in the canal, and there were all these excuses, and now they're sort of like out of excuses, and prices are going up, like with the Dollar Tree example, across the board, not just in these little niche channels. Yeah. So, but anyway, even in spite of that, you still have some of the usual idiots out there trying to take little cheap, what would you call them, layups for the president. Yeah. So there are personalities out there like Don Lemon over on CNN who's celebrating. He put up a chart over, I don't know, maybe a period of a week or something, and he had this little graphic that showed essentially that gas had dropped about 7 cents that week.
Right.
And he was going, whoop! He even got so giddy he was like doing a little hum or a sing or something. 7 cents, baby.
Right.
And then the DCCC, that wonderful group, they put out an ad that says, it showed a graph, this really elongated, stretched out graph. It's another example of funny numbers, okay?
Yep.
Just to show, they make this graph look like there's been a huge decrease in gas prices. But if you really look at it, it's come down about 2 cents. And they've sort of zoomed in on this part of the graph so much that the differential is in fractions of pennies. And we don't have fractions of pennies.
Right.
So, I mean, it's crazy. They show that there's been a 2 cent drop in gas prices, and they caption this. They put it up on Twitter, the link to this, and they said, "Thanks, Biden."
Right.
Yeah, well, thanks, Biden.
That's like back in the summer, right before 4th of July. They said that, thanks to their policies and the economic recovery that the rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan they passed, our 4th of July feast was 16 cents cheaper.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, I remember 16.
that. I think they did something similar around Thanksgiving, too. Yep. But it had dropped by 2 cents or something ridiculous,
right.
Like,
big deal. What's that mean?
Is that really a win? I mean, come on.
No, it's not.
All right, well, the last thing I have here on sort of this news coverage under Biden, in the Biden era here, this one slapped me in the face, okay, and I couldn't not bring it up. But there's this idiot over at the Washington Post, guy named Dana Milbank.
Milbank? Was there an N?
Milbank. I don't know. Milbank. Maybe it is a U, and I'm misreading my own handwriting. Dana Milbank.
Yeah,
sure.
I've definitely heard this story.
Well, he's over at the Washington Post, and he commissioned a study, okay, to count adjective uses in the coverage of our last 2 presidents, okay? And he found out at the end of this that, according to him, his his takeaway from this study that he commissioned is that Joe Biden is targeted with more negative adjectives than Trump was. So get this.
I'm going to guess they probably don't count white supremacist as a negative adjective.
Oh, well, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. I mean,
Okay.
I didn't take the best quote from him, but if you want to go back and look at this link, it will be available. I'll put it up. Most of this comes from Fox News, and as I'm about to quote, Greg Gutfeld. Greg Gutfeld's the source for a lot of this information here.
Yep.
So I think it's funny because I did steal a quote from Greg here.
Okay.
I just love it, so I had to say it. But he said, "We've got a biased writer at a biased paper who commissioned a biased firm to study media bias and found that the media is biased against Biden." I mean, it's just so crazy.
Right.
But I love this. The thing I did quote, I mean, obviously, what kind of language they're defining as negative.
Right, yeah.
That is subjective, and they didn't outline what their criteria is, not to my knowledge. Maybe somewhere. I didn't capture it here for this. But what I did, and what I think is interesting here, is they studied the adjectives that they were studying. They compared the first 11 months of 2021 under Biden versus the first 11 months of 2020 under Trump.
Oh, well, they should have compared.
I see a bias right there because wouldn't it make more sense to compare Biden's first 11 months versus Trump's first 11 months?
Yeah.
So it'd be like the first 11 months of 2021 versus the first 11 months of 2017.
Yeah.
Not 2020.
Yeah, because you want to compare like apples to apples. The first 11 months of the president's term compared to the first 11 months of the president's term.
Well, and I dare say if Trump was getting any kind of good coverage in 2020, it was probably because he was on his way out.
Yeah.
They're probably sitting there going, ding dong,
Thank
the
God
witch is
he's
dead.
gone.
Yeah,
yeah.
So, I mean, if that counts as a positive thing, thank God he's leaving.
Right.
Don't let the door hit you. I mean, see, it's so subjective. It's silly.
Yeah.
But I love one of the last quotes. He says it on CNN or somewhere. You'll have to look at this video I said of Greg Gutfeld. He has the primary source, if you will. But the guy even admits in his own words, you'll see it played if you follow that link. But the guy, he says, it's not a perfect analysis, but it's the first one they've ever had before. And I'm like, yeah, right. Comparing media coverage under one president to media coverage
all the time.
Yeah, so give me a break.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever sat there and counted up the number of adjectives in a paragraph before.
Yeah.
Give me a break, guys.
They do
Come
these
on.
comparisons and studies all the time.
I'm going to commission a few studies too, Reid.
Because I guarantee you they probably, if you can find one comparing Trump's coverage to Obama.
Uh-huh, for sure.
Yeah.
They act like it's brand new, it's never been done before, it's new. And he's trying to caution them and say, we need to be nicer to Biden and watch our language.
Well, I mean, and I'll just put this in real quick. There are articles that came out within the past day or so as we're recording, where there are reports that Biden staffers have been meeting with media people to talk about how they're covering the economic situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't look good for Biden. So it's...
Well, none of it looks good. And you have to remember, he didn't have any negative coverage until that Afghan debacle.
Pretty much.
But still, I mean, who talks about that?
Nobody.
That's over and dead and gone with
down
now.
the memory hole.
If this were Trump, I mean, we'd be on the third impeachment by now.
Yep. They'd be shouting, there's blood all over his hands.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that they would say such a thing. You have to remember, Trump was Hitler.
Yep.
But Biden's had more negative coverage.
Right.
Oh, poor little Biden. Poor little Biden. Needs to run back down into his basement and hide some more.
Yep.
Well, that's all I got, reader.
Yep, that's all I got, and it's been quite a long episode catching up after our break, and it seems like a good spot to wrap it up. And hopefully, our living situations have changed a little bit, so we're hoping to get some more stuff put out a little bit more frequently in the coming months and weeks. So stay tuned for that. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a rating and a review. Oh, I almost forgot. You can also find our episodes for this show, Conservative Conversations, and for the Wicky Wacky radio show on YouTube.
We're now on YouTube.
Yep, there is no actual video component. We might consider that in the future. But it is there, available for anybody if they prefer to stick with, getting their stuff on YouTube, so you don't have to...
So like, comment, and subscribe.
Yep, and share it with your friends, and stay tuned, because we'll be putting stuff up there. And we have a little backlog of some of our episodes. This particular show does not have all of our past episodes, because it would have taken a while to get everything turned into video for the YouTube. But starting with this year's first episode, which was the... I forget the exact title, but it was the predictions. Yep. Yeah. So starting with those episodes and continuing on to our new ones, you can find those on YouTube. Same with the Wicky Wacky radio show. All the episodes are available there. And I think that's about it.
Yep. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and we thank you.
Yep. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.